transracial adoptee from India who's in Australia now. I wondered if you'd like to come and share a bit about your story with us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. It's been, I think, 4 years since I was last on. So 4 years has just gone so quickly. So a little bit of backstory about me, if you don't know, if you're watching. Um, I was born in India, in Patna, and when I was 10 months old, oh, sorry, when I was 2 months old, 2 weeks old, I went into an orphanage and spent the first 10 months of my life in an orphanage in India, and then came across to Australia. I shared a journey with Sharu, who made the movie Lion. We came across from India together, and I grew up in a Aussie Dutch family, and that was pretty cool. My family are a very loving, very supportive family. Um, I had a great childhood, which was awesome. I then sort of transitioned from uh, childhood to high school, and that's where my story and my life changed forever. So I will just tell you that in my story, there's going to be a lot of trigger warnings with sexual abuse and suicidal talk and stuff like that. So I just want to put it out there just in case you get a little bit shocked of some things I bring up or triggered or anything like that. So my high school years started off pretty much. I was only in high school for 2.5 years, and pretty much within the first month of starting year 7, I was sexually abused, and that became an ongoing thing for on a weekly basis for 2.5 years. And I was gang raped by 4 boys on year 8 camp, and the school knew about it, and they turned to my parents and I when I was in halfway through year 9, and they said it's too much for the school to continue to have you here. We can't protect you, and there's too many bullies. So, in the school's best interest, we would like you to leave. So, I left, and that was a Catholic private boys' school in Melbourne, a quite predominant one. And we had no choice, so I had to leave. And the reason some people have asked this, why didn't I leave sooner? Long story short, my parents didn't know about the sexual abuse. They knew about the bullying. It was pretty severe. I would come home quite often with bruises and broken bones and stuff like that. And they were in the school almost weekly saying, "What the hell is going on? Like, what are you doing about this?" Nothing was being done. Um, a lot of these boys that were doing this to me were their families were big donators to the school. So obviously the school looked the other way. And anyway, so uh, that changed my life forever. I was no longer an innocent child or adolescent anymore. Going through those things, I didn't even realize or comprehend what that even was, to be honest. And my parents didn't know about sexual abuse until quite later on. So after I left high school, I went through even worse things that I went through in high school. And it was just quite a few years of just outright shit. And then moving on from when I was in my 20s, I had a bit of a rebel life from after leaving school. I had mental breakdowns, I had psychotic episodes. I just was not right in the head after what had happened to me. And I discovered that I was gay when I was about 16, 17, and my family were really supportive, which was really good. I was very lucky there because I know not everyone's parents are supportive. Um, and my family had always supported me throughout everything in my life. I do have a very strong, supportive family, which is amazing because I have heard a lot of stories where other adoptees haven't been so fortunate, and other people haven't been fortunate to have a supportive family. Um, so all through my 20s, I kind of just I ended up homeless. That was my doing, a lot of shit choices that I made. Um, and then I kind of started getting back on track when I was about 23 and then moved next door to my parents and sort of sorted out my life a little bit and got that on track and started the process of taking my high school to court. And that kind of didn't go anywhere, but we ended up going after the boys, and there was no real resolution there. There was because I had a mental breakdown when I moved in next to my parents, and that was oof, what 2010. So it wasn't that long. Well, I think it was like what 8 years after I left high school, and we reported it to police and everything like that. And then yeah, we went after the school, but couldn't go down the avenue. Went down the avenue of the boys to see if we could get them. No real solution or resolution came from that either, as there was no physical evidence during investigations and stuff like that. So it was a bit difficult, and whoever witnessed it either suddenly had a case of amnesia or didn't want to get involved. And at the time, we had a school librarian tell us that the school uh, went to them and said, please shred all the evidence that you have because we don't want any of this getting out. And my lawyer said at the time, can you please go on record? And she said, over my dead body. So we had no evidence. And at the time, all I proved was severe bullying. So I kind of just left it, and there was no resolution out of that. And I just had to, I suppose, deal with the fact that I wasn't ever going to get justice. Uh, and I just had to move on. And then moving on again through my 20s, I had a long-term relationship that fell apart. And I think that brings us to the last time I came on the show. Um, yeah, that's a very, very quick summary of
It,
my
it's
backstory.
really interesting because it does expand on some things that you sort of hinted at or adumbrated a little bit, some little hints about things that had happened. And I want to appreciate and recognize here that you've said some very vulnerable things. So thank you for your candor in that. And I can imagine just what that must have been like and the fact that there was no justice. And I suppose that would be, and it's not the case that everybody's able to let go of something like that, and nobody's required to do that. But how did you find how does it feel right now before we get into some of the more contemporary elements of your story?
A lot has developed since then. So that was back in 2010, and I never gave up the fight. And I kept going, trying avenues of going down after the school, after the boys. Nothing really came from it. Either I was told that one of the main boys was just impossible to go after because he had a high-powered family, and I was also told that there's no point going after the school because I'd be the sole, a sole family going after the Catholic education system, and that they would just tear me to shreds. So at all avenues, I got not too difficult, or so I just yeah had to accept it up until um, up until about a couple of months ago, which I'll save until a bit later on. So yeah.
Thank you for that. And as I listened to your interview, and I didn't have the good fortune of knowing you when you were recording that the first time, but I heard a number of things in there, and I'd like to kind of put a couple of them in here as we talk. But one of the things that you spoke about was that you described yourself as a happy adoptee at one point, and that you almost said, "Well, I had to shift. Something in me had to shift in my perception of that." Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, yeah. So when I first came into the adoption community online, I wasn't aware of anything of adoptee community um, at all, really. And my counselor suggested to look up on Facebook and look at the communities online for adoption, and I had no idea. So I was all new to everything, and the only thing that came up was an American group, and so I joined an American group, and it was then I realized how huge the adoption community was and how engaging and I suppose liberating to find other people like me. And I wasn't alone. And it never really occurred to me that I was alone until I went into the adoption community and thought, holy shit, like all these years, I've had no one to talk about
Yes.
adoption stuff and except for my parents, because the part of Melbourne that I'm from is very white, and there's there at the time there wasn't many Indians, let alone brown people, and I mean now they've overtaken it. It's great, but back then it wasn't like that. So I didn't have any brown friends or have any introduction to Indian culture. My parents tried my whole life to introduce me to Indian culture, and I kept saying no, no. And my mum would cook curry for the family, and she'd have to cook pasta for me on the side because I wouldn't eat curry because it was too spicy. I'm an Indian that doesn't like curry, so I still don't really like curry. And I can eat butter chicken, and people laugh at me, and they're like, "That's not curry." But but like so, I never really had any like culturalism to me until I went and joined all these adoptee groups, and I started like get to I started to know and meet really great adoptees and connect with them, and it was very overwhelming because when you first come into the adoption community, you hit with all these emotions that you've never had before, and I was it was overpowering and and I didn't really know what to do with that. And so my experience as an adoptee was, I suppose, a little bit naive because I had a great family. And I was hearing all these stories about you're in the fog, you don't know anything, and all that. And I was like, what the F is the fog? Like, I had no idea what the fog was. And then I was Googling online, like, what's the fog? And I kept getting like Stephen King's movie. And I was like, that's not, this is not what this is. This is something completely different. I was like, adoption community fog. It's nothing. I was getting nothing. So I had to ask an adoptee and I felt quite stupid. And they're like, well, and then they were quite direct. And I was like, oh, okay. And then my whole perspective changed. And I was like, hang on, no, that's not me. And then I was kind of fighting against that for a long time. And it wasn't until an incident happened within the adoption community that affected me quite deeply, that was so toxic that I took myself out of the adoption community for quite some time. And I never fully stepped back in. However, I learned a lot of really valuable things from that and about myself, about being an adoptee, about my own identity, about the adoption community, about vocabulary that I didn't even know existed when it comes to adoption or me being an adoptee. And it was really interesting too, because I was able to sit down with my parents and have a really candid conversation. I always can do that, but it was a conversation that my parents and I had never had before because I suppose we didn't have the vocabulary to talk about these issues or these things. And, it was a conversation that was ongoing for quite some time because I was confused and my mum was sort of telling me that I had been drawn into the dark side of adoption, and adoption became a dirty word where she couldn't say anything about adoption where I wouldn't get angry. And she said, "You've never been like that." And that was kind of like oh yeah, like, and then I started writing a list of things that I once thought was okay that wasn't anymore because I was made aware of things. And then I had that conversation with my parents or with people around me and said, hang on, this isn't okay or that's not okay. And it was really good because then we were all able to grow and learn. However, the adoption community can sometimes be a great way to learn very quickly. It's not just slowly, it's not a slow process. It's all thrown at you all at once, and then you have to sit back and go, okay, let's go back to the whiteboard and look at everything and see what everyone said and how I can learn and develop from that. So I completely forgot what your original question was, and I do apologize, but
I think you're kind of answering it along the way, which is the happy, your language was, I was a happy adoptee.
oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
think you're kind of
I
leading into how that fits together.
yeah. So I defended myself quite a bit from that. But over time I evolved as a person, as an adoptee, as my identity. It it threw everything into the mix for me because it made me kind of question my sexuality. I can't even explain how it made me question that, but I think because it threw in everything along the lines of who I actually was, that I questioned even if that was real or that was true, because everything else that I had known had been questioned, and I was like, well, n now it's kind of just thrown everything else into the mix, and I got pushed into this tumble dryer, and I didn't know what end I was going to come out. So that makes no sense because there's only one door in or out. But
Well,
there's,
do
you
you
know what I
think that,
mean?
so your parents had said you weren't like this, but I think I heard something like that too when I came out of the adoption fog. Um, it it must be the result. Everything was thrown in. Everything is upside down. The basis
Yeah,
of your identity is in question. So of course you're going to have a really strong reaction to that, that people can only sit and go, how can I help you through that if they're supportive of you? And then in other cases, unfortunately, people are not supportive. But maybe that was where some
yeah.
of that initial reaction that you felt was coming from.
Yeah, I think another thing too for me is that a lot of people didn't know my story and they had judged from what others who didn't know me had said. And a lot of I had to sit back and think to myself, okay, what is adoption trauma for me and what is life trauma that has happened that is separate from adoption trauma? It does in intermix quite a bit. However, there is a lot of life traumas that I've experienced that had nothing to do with adoption. The emotions would stem from, I suppose, adoption lanes, if that makes sense. So that's where the intermingle comes in, like how I dealt with things, what emotions I felt would stem from, earlier on in life, obviously. But a lot of my trauma was not adopted related, like the sexual abuse and everything else that happened. That was pure high school. How I reacted was from an adoptee perspective. And that was very different to, I suppose, what someone who wasn't adopted might react. I don't know because I am adopted and I can't speak for people who aren't adopted. But
Yeah.
there was a lot of survival. I've been in survival mode, and I would imagine all adoptees or most adoptees are in survival mode quite a lot of times. I think my survival mode kicked in really early. Like I was sexually abused in the orphanage. So luckily my brain does not connect those dots because I was so young. Um, However, that has been a running theme from teenagehood onwards. And so a lot of people assumed that it was from my adoptive family or, people of my family. And it was almost like I was trying to defend my own story against people that knew nothing about me. And it was just like, F off. Like, I know my story. Don't try and convince me that it's anything different. And everyone's trauma, it isn't worse, it isn't less, it's different. And I think that's what I had one comment which stuck out. People were saying, "Oh, your trauma always has to be worse than everyone else's." And I remember thinking, when was this a competition? It's not a competition. Like everyone's trauma is different to everyone else's. It is not a competition. I definitely wouldn't want to be a part of that one if people are thinking it as a competition. So, but that was one of the things, like this was my story. No one else knows my story other than I do. And yeah, I felt like I was defending it. So being a happy adoptee, I was, or what I thought I was. But then a lot of other issues came up where I realized, oh, actually, no, I'm not a happy adoptee. I was just trying to be a happy person apart from all my trauma that I had gone through. So, and that's quite difficult to be able to smile after everything that, I've been through. But,
Sure.
you know, yeah.
Well, that's very helpful and certainly appreciate how you've laid out that something we can all stand to be reminded of, which is it's not a measure of who has been more traumatized, and the variety and the uniqueness of each person's story. Like you said, anyone who's trying to tell you your story or the significance of your story, nobody has the right to do that. I took that
Mm,
away from your interview as well. No one has the right to judge your experience.
mm.
And simply because everybody's is different. Now there are some commonalities, of course, right? Some things that unite us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of them around vocabulary, like you said. That's that your experience coming into the community was similar to my own in terms of I learned all these words. And I kind of had a sense that there were things I didn't know, and I had to ask what the fog was as well. Same sort of things were happening.
Did you get
And I
Stephen
also
King as
had to
well?
yeah, and I also had to find when at the beginning when I could and couldn't speak. That was interesting too, because I found I didn't have enough requisite terminology to say things right, and that would set
Yeah.
people off. And that was unfortunate. So I know there are sides that are down to that, and there are great sides as well. And so you've said also in your interview that there are different groups for different people with different needs, and that's wonderful as
Yeah.
well. And before we move into your what the things are that have transpired for you since the interview, you did also talk about labels, adoptee labels, or and you saw that as kind of problematic. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. Like you said, that with everything, there is a positive and negative. And I'm a strong believer in the yin yang theory. Out of every positive, there is a negative, and out of every negative, there is a positive. Sometimes it just takes a little bit to see that. Um, so you're right, there are really great things about the adoption community as well. You just have to find them and pick what is relevant to you, I suppose. And I, my experience in the adoption community wasn't all bad. I connected with some amazing people, and you know, uh, it's overwhelming with how once you connect with someone, it's just fantastic, and you just form a bond. And one thing that I had to realize was when I was kind of going through, what's a connection and what's not, was if you just have adoption in common or if you have life in common as well. And that was really hard for me at some points because sometimes I would only have friends where I would just talk about adoption. But then other times I would have friends in the adoption community where I could talk about everything. So it was different levels of connection that I had. All connections that I kept and made were amazing and are amazing. Like Roxanne came to Australia, and I took her out for the day, and we went around Melbourne and had a whole adventure, and it was absolutely amazing to meet her in person because we'd known each other for quite some time, and just to be able to like actually meet someone that was an adoptee that I had been friends with for quite a while from overseas was amazing. So you do form those great connections. So it's not all bad. I mean, I do talk a lot about the toxicness of the adoption community. I think as a whole, adoption is toxic in general. And we have to navigate our way through it together. And I think I said in my last interview that it's really difficult when you have different layers of the fog and you have different people at different levels as well, and comprehensive levels too. I definitely know that I was very naive when I came in. As a person and as an adoptee, I was very naive. And it helped me grow and become a more adult and understand myself and what I was going through, who I was, and yeah, it was just really great for that. So it wasn't all toxic. Sorry, I forgot your question again.
I think it
I'm
has to do
terrible.
oh, that's fine. Often the question leads to something very interesting that the guest has, and this was great. It was about labels.
Oh, right. Yeah,
And
sorry.
yeah, and I think it all ties together though.
Yeah, well, yeah, I hate labels. People have labeled me all my life. And, whether it was high school, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, I'm human. I have mental health issues. And a lot of adoptees use that against me. And I didn't like that. But I can come on to an interview and talk about my mental health issues and be open and honest. And in Melbourne, I run mental health walking groups. And I have done for quite some time. I run a men's mental health group and we talk about our issues. We talk about everything. It's hard to talk about your emotions. And for me, I was always labeled as the gay black kid. And I those labels stuck with me for quite some time, and it's hard to shake labels, especially if they're used at you and they're not ones that you want. So one of the biggest learning curves for me was to realize that I am not my labels. And what other people label me, I am not that. And that was really hard to separate because for so many years, I was just these labels. And I had to find my identity within or without those labels. And that is something I'm still doing. And it's, I think that I will be doing that for quite some time still, because we learn until the day we die. And it's hard. And we get new labels and throw some old ones out, or, and as you get older, it just progresses. And, so yeah.
Let's shift into some of the more current things and also some of the things that have happened since the interview that you did on NAP 4 years ago. So any particular developments you'd like to share?
Lots. Oh my goodness, so many great developments. Sad ones and happy ones and even awesome ones. So last time where I left off, I was in a bit of a situation where I was seeing someone and that fell to pieces. But what evolved from that was one of the most life-changing things, and that's what I really want to talk about as well, like one of the key things that I want to talk about today that I learned, and I would never have been able to learn that if I didn't have this experience. So I had met someone, and for the first time in my life, I remember a couple of months prior to meeting this person, my mum and I had a conversation, and I was always unsure if I was able to love fully and wholly because I always had a barrier there. There was always some sort of force field that stopped me from 100% going in. And I always had one foot in, one foot out with every relationship that I had. And this one, for some unknown reason, every single barrier that I put up just went down. And I was so vulnerable. And it was the first time in my life that I was able to love fully and trust wholly. And that was scary for me because I'd never done that before with anyone. And I don't know what it was about him, but all my barriers came down. And when things turned to shit and everything fell apart, I was done. It was the worst experience, and I've experienced a lot, but that was the sole worst experience of my life I'd ever been through because for the first time in my life, I had been stripped of everything that I had ever known because I gave up everything for this person. And I'm still learning that in relationships, that's not what you do. Um, so that's also a learning curve as well. But what came from this one, like for months, I was crying uncontrollably for days, like hours. I would go for walks every single night, and I'd just be walking along the road at nighttime. Like I lived in a country town where like for miles and miles and miles, there was nothing. So like it was fine. It was just country farmland. So I had this main road that I'd walk down every night, and it was therapeutic because it wouldn't matter if it was rain, hailing, whatever. I would just stick on my headphones and walk down the road. I would sometimes sing down the road. I'd scream with anger. I would just get it all out on this road. And it was just, I remember many nights just falling to the ground in weakness and bawling my eyes out and just gone. I was just absolutely um in on New Year's Eve uh from 2021 to 2022. I remember trigger warning. I was at the beach and I decided, right, that was it. Can't take it anymore. I filled a backpack with rocks and I thought, I'm just gonna end it. And I had nothing left. I felt like I had nothing left. And I walked to the end of the pier and I thought to myself, I can't do it. There's too many people. So I walked back down, and there was about a kilometer away, there was another little pier. There wasn't many people there. And I was walking to this little pier. And as I was walking, I had my head down. And the whole time I had my head down. And then all of a sudden, I put my head up, and there was this lady that was walking her bicycle, and she smiled at me, and I smiled, and then I put my head down. And something inside me just said, you need to stop and you need to turn around. I don't know what it was, but I stopped and I turned around, and this lady was looking at me, and she smiled and she said, "Come here." A complete stranger. And I'm like, okay. And I walked up to her. She put her hands on my shoulders and said, "How are you?" I just lost it and burst out into tears. I was hysterical. And she just grabbed me, hugged me, and held me tight. And she said, God wanted to stop you. God told me to stop you and hug you and tell you that you're not going to go through with what you're going to go through with tonight. He's got bigger plans for you, and it's going to be all right. Now, I'm not necessarily, I believe in a higher power, but I don't know what that is. And for that night, I truly believe that God did have a hand in that because she sat me down, the complete stranger, on New Year's Eve at 11 o'clock at night, and we just sat on the pier. And I was crying hysterically for about an hour. And she was just telling me about the loss of her partner and everything. Like I couldn't, she didn't even get to hear my name. Like I was just hysterically crying. And it was so profound that it was just incredible. Um, and the only thing I can put it down to was that I was being looked after because I don't know, but that was a pretty profound changing moment for me. And from then onwards, life started to get a little better, and I ended up doing a leadership course. It was called LMCLP, which is um, it helps you develop as a person. So it helps. you become a leader from within. And it was one of the best things that I'd ever done. I still felt like I had no purpose, but this course, it was a year-long course, and I found my purpose again. And it taught me to, I suppose, harness the emotions and the ability to be more community diverse and just be a leader, a leader from within. And it was just amazing. Best thing that I've ever done in my life. And it saved my life in so many senses as well. And since then, I have managed to continue my fight against the school. And I am proud to say that I got a call randomly. I had done some things in the background a couple of years back, about 2, 3 years ago, and I never heard anything from them. And I thought that's not going to lead anywhere, just keep up. And in December, I got a call randomly out of the blue, and this lady said where she was from, and she was a representative for a law firm, and she said that the school has admitted that your sexual abuse took place. And
Oh,
I, this was like, I'd missed 3 calls from this person because it was a private number, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to stay up all night just so I can ring them at 9 o'clock in the morning on Monday morning. And as I was trying to call them, they were calling me. And I was like, holy shit, this must be like important. I don't know who this is. And this lady explained where she was from. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I thought, oh, okay, she's going to tell me that nothing's come from it. And she said, we've got some good news. I was like, oh, okay. And she's like, the school has finally admitted that your sexual abuse has happened. I went silent for about 5 minutes, and she was like, are you there? And I'm like, uh-huh. And I just burst out into tears. Like, I had been waiting 25 years for this. And so, and there was no NDA in anything, so I can talk about it. Probably not safe to name the school at this point yet, but I will in the coming months. But I will be getting a written apology and a face-to-face apology from the school, that and an acknowledgement that the sexual abuse took place, which now will give me more power to go after the perpetrators. So, yeah.
we
So 25
congratulate
years
you.
of never
It's
giving
amazing.
up.
And it was just in December.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
So, yep.
Well,
Yep.
congratulations on that step. That must feel amazing.
Thank
So
you.
many, lots of feelings, but yeah, people are
It,
excited for you to have that.
it it was overwhelming, and the first thing I did was call my mum, and she's burst out to tears. And it was quite interesting actually to witness her response, because I burst out into tears when I first heard it, but it was more, I don't know what I'm crying for, because I it was all just holy crap, fireworks of emotions. But then my mum went through like anger. It was like the 7 stages of grief in so such short time, and it's explain it's understandable. And when I got off the phone, I think I went through it as well, because it was like, oh yeah, shit, this is 25 years of fighting. But then I went through the process, I have been going through the process of, well, shit, what do I do now? Because I can lay down my swords. I don't know what life is like without fighting for justice. And that's really difficult to, I suppose, comprehend, because it's, I suppose, over in some senses. Like my battle, that battle is what was the biggest, and I don't know what life is like without fighting that battle. So that's the next chapter of my life. Like, that's 25 years of fighting for something that I never thought would come, that randomly all of a sudden came. So, you know, that's going to be an interesting process.
You must feel like there's a whole discovery of yourself ahead. What to do now?
Yes, yes. It's really sad. So a lot of people and the reason why I say sad, a lot of people know that I had a golden retriever, Bailey, and she passed away last year. It's almost been a year, and um, so there's so many times that like I just wanted to like, ooh, like talk to her and tell her that the fight's won, and my nana passed away 2 years ago as well. So, it would have been, but I talked to them and it's actually really amazing. I got to tell you this little story. So, my partner, now, his mum has a golden retriever, and when I first met his parents, I looked at their dog Daisy, and it was identical to Bailey, and I was like, oh goodness, like, and I burst out into tears the first time I saw her, and every time I went over, it was so hard to look at her because she looked identical. And then I asked, where did you get Daisy from? And she said, oh, I got her from this town. And I said, oh, okay. And I'm thinking, nowhere near the town that I got her. And then she said, oh, actually, she originally came from this town, but she got brought up to this town. And I'm like, oh my God, that's where I got Bailey. And then we checked our records, and it turns out that Daisy is Bailey's sister. So every time, that's why they look so
It's
identical.
incredible.
But what are the chances that 12 years later, I just happened to meet someone with Bailey's sister? And so, like, incredible. So, we just came back from seeing them last night, and it's so I find real joy in like seeing his family and Daisy because it's like I'm visiting Bailey. So, it's just, but yeah, I still talk to Nana and Bailey, and just to, I don't know, I think they're looking after me because everything happened after them, and you know so yeah.
How does it feel to tell this news? I don't know if you've shared this anywhere else, but what does it feel
I
like to come
haven't.
out and talk about it?
um Liberating, actually. So I put up a post on Facebook a couple of days ago about it, because I knew that I wanted to talk about it, and I know that some people have been following um this process with high school and everything like that. And I it's it's hard to put into words, actually. Um, I think I think one of yeah, it's just really hard to put into words. I'm actually like stopping myself from getting really emotional because I think this is the first time I've actually spoken about it in the sense of not fighting anymore, in the sense on the other end of it, and this is new for me. So yeah, it's liberating,
Yeah,
scary.
I can imagine it's all kinds of things. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
very brave. Feels
Thank
that
you,
way to me anyway. Courageous to be able to tell
thank you.
someone, but it must be a source of relief. But I can hear also you saying, "What what what do I become now?
Yeah.
If I was this advocate and this fighter for this for so long, what what does the energy of my identity go into
Yeah.
from this point on? That's a big journey.
I think one of the biggest things out of this, that I tell myself anyway, is that it doesn't matter how long in between justice or some sort of justice, um, or recognition. I don't think it'll ever be justice, but some recognition, um, is that never give up, because it took 25 years of a lot of, you can't do anything. That's never going to work. The school's never going to acknowledge it. Forget it, move on, live your life, just process everything and just move on because they're never going to acknowledge it. But continuing that fight, knowing that it probably would never go anywhere and have an actual outcome, is huge. One good thing I do want to mention is the morning that I received the news, later that afternoon, Roxanne and I caught up. So it was like the first person I told, and it was just so awesome to be able to like share that news and have such an awesome day to kind of process, enjoy, instead of sitting there by myself with my partner, and I suppose go through sad emotions. So it really helped with that process of celebrating the fight and the joy and how everything paid off, I suppose. So thanks for that.
Hopefully we'll give you a copy of the chat conversation. You can see people sharing your excitement here and having some fun with your accent too, which is fun. It is enjoyable. It really is.
Sometimes I
There's so
forget.
many so many things I could say to you, Vin, after listening to you. And I still have all these questions from the interview, and I also want to make sure I give you some time to talk about if are there any other new developments you'd like to talk about before we close here?
that's that's pretty much
That's
everything
big.
up to date. So
Sure.
it's life changing and so many. Oh, one thing that I didn't mention as well, which I should have, which was the whole thing why I mentioned it in the first place. The relationship that made me realize everything, the one that broke my soul in the process. I never actually told you what I learned in that process, which I kind of skipped because I kind of led to something else. In the process of that, the reason why that was so profound for me was because while I was holding everything back, when I lost that person, it took me to absolute rock bottom. And it was the first time that I'd ever been in rock bottom, like that low ever. That's the lowest I'd ever been. That was the key to unlocking my trauma, my past trauma. I didn't realize that all the past traumas that I had kept behind this door. And it was it was almost like Super Mario World. When you defeat a boss, a door appears and you enter and then save the princess. It was like that. I was so low that I had absolutely nothing left, that the only way out for me was this door to walk through. And that door only appeared when I went through this breakup and I went through this soul crushing thing because it was never there. That door was never an option and never appeared before this happened. Uh, and when I had no other options except to open this door. And once I walked through that door, I then spent the next, well, up until now, still processing every single bit of past trauma that I had ever gone through. And I was never able to access that door before that. So, one of the biggest things that I learned is that sometimes in life, the only thing that unlocks that trauma, because I know that I kept it all inside because I didn't want to face it. I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know how to comprehend it. But that was the key to unlocking all my past traumas. And I think that was, not think, it was a profound realization for me that I had to be at that low in order for that door to appear to walk through. Because I had no other choice except to walk through that door. I had nothing left. I thought that I had nothing left. And that was the only option. And yeah, that was my reason why I told you about all that, was to tell you this part of it. But yeah, that was quite profound. So yeah, yeah.
You. I'd like to conclude by just giving you a couple words of affirmation. Listening to your interview from 4 years ago and talking to you online, getting ready for this discussion, and then the interaction with you now, and your words about yourself in the interview really ring true, which is about your kindness. You're a very kind person. You have a very lovely spirit, and it's been a real pleasure to be able to talk with you.
Thank you very much. I try to be as kind as I can be because we're all human and there's so much hate in this world, even more so now than ever. And if everyone can be kind, I reckon it would save a hell of a lot of energy because it takes nothing to be kind. It love and kindness is what I would like to think an essence of who I am. So thank you so much for saying that. And it's been amazing to come back after 4 years and give an update and chat with you all. And thank you so much for everyone that's come today and listened and been here. So thank you so much.
Wow. Wonderful. And we wish you well and for continued success in your journey, and hopefully more good news awaits you. And for everybody, we're appreciating you coming to hear Vin tonight. I think we say
Thank
it's
you.
another wrap for NAAP, but we will switch in just a minute here to a Q&A session. So Jen, if you'd like to conclude the recording.